Welcome to National Parks Traveler, where we explore the national parks and the issues that involve them.
Tens of millions of people in the United States will be able to witness a total solar eclipse on Monday, as the rare astronomical event cuts a path from Texas to Maine up to 122 miles wide in some spots. This is a rare opportunity to see the exact moment when the moon fully blocks the sun, creating a blazing corona visible to those observing from the center line of totality. This is Kurt Repenchek, your host at the National Parks Traveler. There are a number of national park units within the eclipse path that runs from Texas to Maine that offer good vantage points to view the eclipse. And the parks offer a great plan B of exploration and education if the day turns out to be cloudy or worse. This week, the Traveler's Lynn Riddick, who is planning to be in the center line of totality as the eclipse passes through Texas, speaks with renowned astronomer Tyler Nordgren, who is also planning to be in the center line as it passes through New York. Lynn and Tyler will discuss the eclipse, as well as some national park eclipse viewing opportunities after this break.
The Blue Ridge Parkway Foundation is the primary nonprofit fundraising partner for the Blue Ridge Parkway. It is made up of people who have a deep love for this majestic road and want to ensure that its natural beauty and the experiences it offers endure for generations to come. Show your appreciation at brpfoundation.org. Smokey's Life, full of stunning photography and thought-provoking reads, Smokey's Life Journal is a biannual magazine produced by Smokey's Life, formerly the Great Smoky Mountains Association. Members receive it free of charge each spring and fall, and it is available for purchase in retail stores throughout Great Smoky Mountains National Park and online at smokieslife.org. Listener and reader support make the National Parks Traveler possible every day of the year. If you enjoy the Traveler's content, please consider a donation at nationalparkstraveler.org.
It seems everybody's talking about the total solar eclipse on April 8th, and for good reason. 30 million of us in 15 different states actually live in the path of totality, and that doesn't count the zillions of travelers from other parts of the country and the world making their way to spots along the path to take it all in. One of those people living near the path is Dr. Tyler Nordgren, calling in today from Ithaca, New York. Tyler is an astronomer, author, educator, photographer, and all-around fan favorite. He spoke with the Traveler a couple of years ago about his work promoting dark skies in the national parks. And he's back to tell us all about the eclipse. Hi, Tyler. Welcome back to the Traveler.
It is so good to be back. Thank you for having me.
So how about starting with a Solar Eclipse 101? What is exactly happening?
What's happening on April 8th is that the moon is going to pass between the Earth and the sun. And so as the sun shines on the moon casts a shadow, and that shadow on that day is going to fall on the Earth. And as the moon goes around the Earth, that shadow is going to trace a path across North America from Mexico through the United States and out through Canada. And during those few precious moments when the moon's shadow passes over you, if you're lucky enough to be within that narrow path, you are going to see the sun turn black and day turn to night. It is the most unnatural, natural experience I've ever had.
And you described it black hole sun in your book.
Exactly. That life-giving energy ball there in the sky that we're all so used to that we hardly even notice it suddenly turns black as pitch. Its outer atmosphere, the corona, these ghostly tendrils suddenly stretch off in all direction, and it is absolutely eerie.
So the moon's diameter has to appear larger than the sun's for this to happen. So does that mean the moon is closer to the Earth, or the sun is further away, or a combination of both?
It's a combination of both. This Greek philosopher Anaxagoras, who lived about 500 BC in Athens, was the first in Western philosophy to hypothesize that the moon was actually covering the sun during an eclipse. And that implies the moon is closer to the Earth than the sun. And because the two look almost equally large in our sky, that means that if the sun is further away, it's got to be larger than the moon. It was really a profound revelation. But that's what's happening during a total solar eclipse. Our moon is closer to us and just happens to be larger than the sun in terms of how it appears from here on the surface. And so, for those lucky people in the path of totality, there's going to be up to 4.5 minutes when that sun's bright disk is completely covered by the disk of the moon.
And that seems to be an incredible amount of time to witness this. Is that span of time unusual for a solar eclipse or, about the same?
It's about average. Most of the eclipses I've seen have been somewhere around 2 minutes. Though the one that we had back in 2017, I think got 2 minutes and 40 seconds was the longest. So this is about twice that. But there's an eclipse coming up in August of 2027 that's going to go over the Nile in Egypt, and it's going to be 6.5 minutes in length. Physically, I think somewhere around 7 minutes and some odd seconds is physically the longest it can be.
Incredible. So, how many different types of solar eclipses are there? This one's a total solar eclipse. Explain the differences.
So there's three main types. One is a partial eclipse, and that's where from wherever you're looking up at the sun with protective eyeglasses, mind you, only part of the sun's disk gets covered by the moon. That's a partial eclipse. Everybody in the United States, in fact, for almost all of North America, sees at least a partial eclipse that day. Then, for those folks, like I said, in that lucky path of totality, that partial eclipse turns into a total eclipse. The moon completely covers the sun. So that's a total eclipse. Now, the moon's orbit around the Earth is slightly elliptical. So that means that sometimes it's a little closer to the Earth, sometimes a little farther away. If this total eclipse, if this solar eclipse that we're seeing on April 8th were to happen when the sun was at its most distant point from the Earth, then its size would not be enough to completely cover the sun. And so if you were in the path of maximum alignment, you'd get this little ring of sunlight still visible at that maximum alignment. And that's called an annular eclipse. Some people call it a ring of fire. We had one of those just last October, in October of 2023, that went through a whole bunch of national parks and monuments out west. Okay, that's an annular eclipse. At no point is it ever safe to look at that with the unaided eye. You have to keep your eclipse glasses on the entire time. But during a total eclipse, when that sun's disk is completely covered, during those few precious seconds or minutes of totality, then is the only time you can take your eclipse glasses off and see that amazing dark black sun with the corona all around it.
Wow. And so, how often do these come around? Has science sort of determined the schedule?
Absolutely. So, for instance, a solar eclipse, a total solar eclipse, happens somewhere on Earth on average about every 18 months. Sometimes it's let's see, we had the last one took place out in Western Australia in February of last year. So, okay, we've had about I guess about 14 months between these two. On average, any place on the surface of the Earth sees totality about once every 366 years, but that's an average. For instance, the lucky folks in Carbondale, Illinois, they are in the crossroads between the eclipse we had back in 2017 and the one that we're having this year. So they got to see two, or they will get to see two total solar eclipses in 7 years. So it's an average.
We got a good view of the 2023 October eclipse here where I live in San Antonio, Texas. And so that was exciting and interesting to look at, but it was not, like you say, a total solar eclipse.
Exactly. An annular eclipse is really neat. It's interesting. Seeing the sun turn into this ring is lovely, but it is completely pales in comparison to what a total solar eclipse is. Uh, If you are in that path where the sun is completely covered, then the temperature plummets, the birds stop singing, the sky goes dark, the stars and brighter planets come out, and then that corona, which at all other times is utterly invisible, that corona becomes visible. And it at a temperature of about 1,000,000 degrees, it's the hottest thing that any human being is ever going to see with their own eyes. And it is utterly invisible at all times, except during those few precious seconds and minutes of totality.
Yeah, about the corona. So when we see it, are we looking at gases around the sun, or can we actually see the perimeter, the very edge of the sun?
So during totality, when that sun's disk, its surface, or what we technically call the photosphere, is completely covered, that corona is the very thin outer atmosphere. It's a plasma. So free electrons at extremely hot temperatures streaming off into space. The sun has a solar wind. It sheds material, electrons and protons fleeing out through the solar system at all times. And so you're seeing part of where that comes from up there in space. And it that corona changes. It depends on what's going on the sun, what the magnetic fields are like. Are there lots of sunspots? Is the sun what we call active? The sun goes through an 11-year solar cycle. Right now, it's at its most active. And so the predictions are that corona, when it becomes visible, is going to be this literal crown, rays shooting off in all directions from the sun. It should be magnificent.
And viewers should be able to see that corona move and wiggle and span out and change shape with our regular solar eclipse glasses.
No, that corona, it changes over a much slower time scale than what you're going to see during those few minutes of totality. There is this project that happened during 2017, in which, and I think might be happening this time as well, in which a group sent out telescopes and cameras to people all along the path of totality to get them to photograph that corona in high detail during however few minutes they had. And then they were going to stitch all those images together to create a video that was going to span 90 minutes, which was the time it took the moon shadow to move from Oregon to South Carolina. I never saw the final results, so I don't know what it looked like. But one of the things they were hoping to see were changes in that corona over those 90 minutes.
I remember as a kid growing up in Maryland, we had a solar eclipse and it was really exciting. I wonder when that was. So it seems like it might have been the eclipse on March 7th, 1970. I would have been like 11. And it was a Saturday, I discovered, because I got to thinking, well, how were we able to be running around in the backyard witnessing this if we should have been in school? But then I looked and saw that it was a Saturday, so it made sense. So I remember that it got darker, but not totally dark, because looking at the path now, as I was researching, to talk with you, we did not have totality where I lived in central Maryland, but it got dark, not totally dark or whatever. And we were looking at it through our homemade boxes. We didn't have eclipse viewing glasses back then. What can you tell us about eclipses and what we've learned about them scientifically since 1970? Anything?
So let's see. So yeah, what you experienced sounds very much like a deep partial eclipse. As the moon covers the sun, it does get darker. I mean, the sun's light does drop, but our eyes, our pupils open up to accommodate that. And so the human perception is you don't really notice how dark it's getting up until just really maybe 30 seconds, a minute before totality. And then suddenly, as totality comes on, it rapidly turns to as dark as, say, a half an hour or more after sunset. It's that level of darkness. So dark, in fact, that were you to be under cloudy skies, which it's beginning to look like a lot of people may be under cloudy skies for this upcoming eclipse. Even if you are clouded out wherever you are in totality. It is going to get dramatically dark all of a sudden for you. So yeah, so it sounds like you probably had a very deep partial eclipse there in Maryland. Uh, in the last, oh gosh, how many years is that? That's longer than I'd like to think. It's about 50 years ago now. Um, yeah, one of the ongoing areas of study that people still have about solar eclipses is looking at that boundary between the surface of the sun and the corona. How does all this energy from deep inside the sun make its way into the corona? The fact that this atmosphere, this outer atmosphere of the sun, is at a temperature of 1 million degrees when the surface of the sun is only about 6,000 degrees is one of these areas of ongoing research. And so there are folks that do travel into the path of every totality in order to get images in various wavelengths. There's a group out of I think Boulder, Colorado this year. They're flying high altitude planes with cameras looking in all different wavelengths of the spectrum at the eclipse as it happens.
So you painted us a picture about what will happen as far as it'll get darker, the temperature will drop, bird song will quiet, maybe animal behaviors will change. What kind of things will happen on more of a global atmospheric scale?
So for we human beings, this becomes a multi-sensory experience, sight and sound and touch, and that touch being the drop in temperature as the shadow of the moon goes over us, and that does have an impact on the weather patterns overhead. I've been to eclipses where it looked like it was cloudy and then suddenly cleared up at that last moment as suddenly the temperature dropped. But I've also been to eclipses where it had been raining for a week beforehand, and so the air was thick with moisture. And even though the clouds parted as that temperature dropped about a minute before totality, suddenly the clouds all reformed again. So there are some effects on the weather patterns. But otherwise, on a global scale, it's just this the shadow passing over us. It really doesn't impact the Earth in a geologic way. It's only in our perceptions that we really have this very dramatic impact as this absolutely otherworldly phenomena passes over us. That our brains realize that something wrong is happening because this is something that only happens to a very select few people, once every year or so.
So, to see totality, the moment when the moon fully blocks the sun, you need to be in the right place exactly at the right time. So, where are you going to be?
This is the second time in my life that totality is coming to me. My first time was when I was 9 years old in Portland, Oregon in 1979, when the eclipse went right over my house. But I was too scared to go out and look at it because all the news media concentrated so much on don't look at the sun, you'll go blind. But I thought there was some special rays that came out of the sun. So I hid in the house and watched it on TV. So this time, now that it's coming right by Ithaca, New York, through central New York, I'm working with New York State Parks. We're going to be up on Lake Ontario, one of the small little state parks up there, Fairhaven Beach State Park. And I've got friends and family coming. There probably going to be a few thousand people. It's a tiny little park, but it's right there on the edge of the lake. And we'll just keep our fingers crossed that the weather holds between now and then. But either way, it'll be something spectacular for exactly 3 minutes and 25 seconds.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how long it was going to last. Any idea what the conditions will be like cloud wise, cloud coverage wise?
Right now, it's looking favorable, but the weather forecast seems to be for increasing high altitude clouds that day. We look like we're right on the edge of whatever this big weather system is over the Great Lakes. So a little change one direction or the other can have a big impact. And I don't think any of us are really going to know until the day of. And again, it's as that shadow moves over you that things could change dramatically one direction or the other. So I don't know. like everybody else, we'll be taking our chances, crossing our fingers, hoping for the best.
Well, I live in San Antonio, Texas, and I was thinking about either going to Kerrville, Texas, in the very center of Totality, about an hour drive from my house. And then I got the idea to go to Johnson City, Texas, which is just outside the LBJ National Historical Park, and hang with friends that day to watch. But then I changed my mind because here at my home, we are going to be able to see Totality for 2 minutes and 52 seconds. And I figured that's almost as good as the 4 minutes plus offered in those other places. Cloud coverage here is supposed to be 60 to 80% chance, I guess, of cloud coverage. So that's not good. But I guess I was curious to know what kind of calculations or anything that you've done to ensure that your spot there in New York in the state park is going to be like optimal for your viewing.
So there's folks out there who study what are the historical weather patterns for places along totality on those dates at those times. And you can take Jay Anderson is a famous eclipse chaser who's a Canadian climatologist who puts out a website that does exactly that. So for most of the last 7 years, people have been looking at, okay, Texas, down in the Southwest, better odds than where I am up in central New York and New England. But one of the things that I looked at was his analysis of New York and being around the Great Lakes. So when I was working with New York State Parks, we took a look at those maps, and it seemed to indicate that there was a slightly better chance of clear skies if you were up against the Great Lakes. So we found a park there were a number of parks that are up there, and I found one that had a relatively good duration of totality, 3 minutes and 25 seconds. And the odds of clear skies historically were about, 45% maybe. So I thought, okay, that sounds good enough, at least for staying here in New York. And so we all just did the best we could and said one way or another, it's going to be an event. And now it looks like we may beat those odds. Again, fingers crossed, but I couldn't justify flying away from New York after having spent the last several years building up interest here in my community, in my state, to then suddenly fly off somewhere else that had better odds. So I was always committed to New York, and it looks like I may get lucky on that one, but we'll have to see.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, in San Antonio, Texas, we have about 300 days of sunshine. So I feel like the odds are really, in our favor to have a clear day, at least, partly clear, the day of the eclipse. What kind of photographic equipment or telescopes are you going to take along?
So I'm actually taking nothing. Part of it is I'm going to be the master of ceremonies for the park. So I'll be the guy out there with the microphone and the speakers telling people at what time we're going to see that first little bite taken out of the sun and what to look for on the ground, and then the moment of totality when you can take the glasses off. So that's great. I my goal here is to help share this with the people, and also I just want to enjoy this. One of the rules of thumb that I tell people is if this is your first eclipse, just see it. Don't waste your time with a camera trying to figure out how to focus or fiddling around with the screen on your iPhone. Just absorb this multi-sensory experience. See your first eclipse, photograph your second one. And odds are, unless you're really good at night sky photography and then you've been doing this and you're used to photographing the moon and things in the sky, odds are there's going to be somebody out there who does know how to do that and is going to take a much better photograph than you. So these are such amazing, emotionally stirring, multi-sensory experiences. I just encourage everyone to go out there and just enjoy it. And don't waste your time looking through the viewfinder at this.
That's good advice. I'd like you to read an excerpt from your book, Stars Above, Earth Below, describing your anticipation of viewing the 2017 total solar eclipse.
A hush falls as the shadow sweeps over the crowd beside the road. My watch says 11:34 Mountain Daylight Time, shortly before noon, and drivers all over Grand Teton National Park in western Wyoming have pulled off to the edges of roadways. The daylight dims and a strange twilight takes hold. What's been growing for an hour comes on like a sudden curtain's fall in the final seconds. When at last the moon passes completely between earth and sun, the parting rays of sunlight stream down on me through valleys along the shadowed lunar limb. Beads of diamond light twinkle and shine where the sun disappears. They are strung together on a ghostly ring encircling the silhouetted moon. Then it's gone. Halfway between south and east, horizon and zenith, a great gaping black hole stares down on me out of what's now an opalescent summer sky. For 2 minutes and 20 seconds, I stand in the full shadow of the moon. Pale pearly streamers of the solar corona, the high, hot upper atmosphere of the sun, fly like wind-blown hair around the darkened disk. At all other times, they are completely lost within blinding glare of the solar surface. Venus, Mars, and Jupiter appear amid winter constellations I haven't seen for nearly half a year. I've spent my entire life looking up at the sky, and in all that time, I have never seen anything else as awe-inspiring as a total eclipse of the sun.
Let's talk about some national parks that will be in the eclipse path. According to the National Park Service, the path of totality will cross 27 national park units. There's a good chart on nps.gov of the park units in the path. What do you know about which parks might offer the easiest access with especially dramatic settings for viewing?
So I'm working with a number of parks. I've created posters for parks like LBJ, National Historical Park there in Texas. Also, Hot Springs National Park in Arkansas is a big destination for lots of park rangers that I know have been sent out there. Buffalo National River, also there in Arkansas, and then Ozarks National Scenic Riverways in Missouri. Then let's see, many smaller parks, Lincoln Boyhood, Dayton Aviation Heritage. So that's Lincoln Boyhood up in Indiana, Dayton in Ohio, Cuyahoga Valley. There's a spectacular park next to Cleveland. I know they're having a big event. So lots of places along the whole path of totality. Many of them parks that not a lot of folks are familiar with, and so it's a real opportunity to discover these other national parks and the beauty that they afford out here in the eastern U.S.
One of the books you wrote is Sun, Moon, Earth: The History of Solar Eclipses from Omens of Doom to Einstein and Exoplanets. So, as the title suggests, you cover the gamut of how, eclipse events witnessed by civilizations around the globe evolved from something that was greatly feared to Victorian era tourist attractions to present day overkill. What are the earliest documented records of eclipses, such as maybe rock carvings or rock formations?
Well, we know here in the United States, there are petroglyphs out in places like Chaco Culture National Historical Park that appear to be a record of a total solar eclipse.
That's New Mexico, correct?
Correct, yes. And those are only about 1,000 years old. But that's when the Chicoans, the ancestral Puebloan people, the center of the ceremonial life in the Pacific, in the American Southwest, was at its height, and there were potentially several eclipses that went over that canyon, even within the lifespan of a particular of a one individual could have seen several eclipses. And so there's some research that indicates that perhaps that might have had some influence on why the Chicoans suddenly abandoned the canyon around 1200 AD. But you look around the world, and there's accounts of total solar eclipses from China from about 5,000 years ago, in which how that corona happened to manifest itself, what that would say about the quality of the king, the dynasty that was at that time. And so if you were a court astrologer, it could be a good time to try to hedge your bets and get in good with the king and proclaim an auspicious corona. But we also know from other cultures around the world, in Hindu astrology, a total solar eclipse is when Rahu, this giant, immortal, bodiless head, would attempt to eat the sun and the moon. So every culture around the world has seen something different in the sky when the sun goes black.
This is probably not a short answer question, but who are the scientists that contributed most to the understanding of solar eclipses?
So in Western astronomy, really the height of eclipse expeditions began in the 1800s. Francis Bailey was one of the first to go and actually travel to places where eclipses were going to be. And he brought along telescopes to observe all the various phenomena. He was the one that saw these things that we now call Bailey's beads, when the last rays of the sun disappearing behind the moon suddenly break up into little beads along the lunar limb. And those were from mountains and valleys along the limb of the moon, breaking the sun into all sorts of little pieces as it disappeared behind it. Then you had folks like Norman Lockyer, British astronomers who learned that the prominences, these red flames along the edge of the sun, were hydrogen and helium gas. And so learning about the composition of the sun. So it was during the 1800s, really, that if you considered yourself a civilized Western country, you sent eclipse expeditions with astronomers and telescopes off to every single eclipse that was happening wherever it was in the world.
You can go to nasa.gov and click on the Eclipse Explorer map and enter your zip code and all of the exact time. It's like a timetable of when you'll see the entire eclipse from start to finish where you are. And then I've learned that NASA is going to be doing a 3-hour live stream of the event featuring interviews with all kinds of experts from all over the country as the eclipse passes over the continent. And then they are also going to be live streaming with no commentary, telescope only images from multiple locations. So that's really exciting stuff. Have you been involved in any of this for NASA's preparation of this?
So my involvement with NASA, I designed an eclipse poster for them to use in their educational outreach. It was free for people to download and use however they like. But really, for this eclipse, my involvement has been focused here on New York, working with New York State Parks, getting people in the area to be aware that Totality was coming, and knowing where Totality would be. Because as you mentioned, we know this very precisely. There are websites you can go to put your location in, and it will tell you what your duration of totality or partial will be. Here in New York, our state's been cut in half by those who are in totality and those who aren't. And there are so many communities that are just barely outside, that one of the things I've been primarily involved with is getting folks outside totality to know you can't stay here. 99% is not 99% of the phenomenon. It's not good enough. You need to get into that path. And for where I am, for instance, here in Ithaca, it's just a 20-minute drive into totality. And so it's 20 minutes for a life-changing experience is something that everyone should make the effort for.
Right. And these charts, like I say, the NASA chart is very specific. You can enter your zip code or your mother's zip code or your friend who lives somewhere else's zip code and find out exactly the time that you can expect every phase of the eclipse. And that's really exciting stuff. Let's talk about Eclipse Day some more. I know that some counties and communities, towns across the US have declared advanced states of emergency due to expected strains on first responders and medical facilities, food, fuel shortages, traffic gridlocks. 1 million people are expected to come into central Texas alone. Reportedly, maybe you can speak to this too, but during the 2017 solar eclipse, traffic jams lasted up to 13 hours after totality was over. So, what was your experience in 2017? How are you prepared to make it more bearable if needed?
That's a great question. There are some lessons that we did learn from 2017. First of all, the eclipse in 2017 happened on a Monday, just like this eclipse is happening on. So right there, there's some lessons that you can take from that. One is that people traveled into totality over the course of several days. They used Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, even in Monday morning to arrive. So traffic jams that people were worried about before totality did not materialize in a lot of places. What did happen, as you alluded to, is that the instant totality was done, people headed to their cars. And so it became the world's worst concert traffic jam as everybody said, all right, I'm heading to the exits to get out of here as quickly as possible. And so suddenly you had everybody in their car at the exact same moment heading away from totality. One example, a great example, is what happened up in Wyoming. The population of Wyoming is projected to have more than doubled for the eclipse as everybody from Denver drove up there. And then you had Interstate 25 as everyone was heading south from Wyoming. And there are these photographs of the northbound lanes of I-25 being empty, but the southbound lanes were one giant traffic jam as everyone was heading back. So the word that we're trying to get out, that communities are trying to get out, is stay where you are. Take that extra night. I was up in Eastern Oregon for the eclipse, John Day Fossil Beds National Monument, and we were on a ranch. We spent the night there afterwards, and the next day I didn't encounter a single car on the road as I drove back to Los Angeles. So utterly missed the traffic just by spending that extra night. So what we're trying to tell folks is stay where you are. Don't immediately get in your car to go home, and make another evening of it.
Probably good advice. Yeah. I was talking to a friend who said that they had been planning this for 5 years.
Yeah, so I'm on the American Astronomical Society task force for the eclipse. We've been working with communities, emergency services, organizers, scientists, educators, traffic specialists, folks from the federal government. And yes, communities have been planning for years for this. And I mean, honestly, yeah, right now the news media has just gotten a hold of this story. Even though we've been working on this for years, the news media has really only picked this up in the last few weeks. And so, yeah, the sensational stories are all the potential things that can go wrong. Yeah, there was traffic last time in 2017. There were not riots. There were not food shortages. People weren't. It You plan ahead, go to the grocery store. I filled up my car with gas a couple days ago, but that's it. There's certainly, we've all, over these last 5 years, been through much worse disasters and troubles that are going to happen on Monday. So relax, enjoy this otherworldly, amazing experience that is truly the word awe is not an overused word when it comes to an eclipse. And the people that experience it, you look around at one another, and we all have this silly grin on our faces because we just feel so wonderful and connected with one another in the universe. It's an actual psychological phenomenon. And I would hate for people to not experience that because they have just been freaked out by all the news media, just as I, a 9-year-old kid, was back in 1979, who hid in my house. So, yeah, take it with a grain of salt, plan ahead, but have an amazing experience. You will not regret it.
And know that you have a 20-year heads-up lead for the next solar eclipse.
Right. So there's 3 more eclipses coming up in the next couple of decades. In 9 years, there's one that's going to go over far northern Alaska. So if you've ever wanted to see Nome, Alaska, or the Arctic Ocean, that's a good eclipse for you. And hey, it's happening in March, so you might even get to see the Northern Lights that night. But for us down here in the continental US, there is a little bit of Montana and North Dakota that gets to see totality in 2044, so 20 years from now. But in 2045, 21 years from now, there's going to be another coast-to-coast eclipse that's going to go from Northern California. I think it goes over Moab and Arches National Park, as if they need another reason to have even more traffic. And then goes down to the southeast. So Disney World will be in the path of totality for that eclipse. So I cannot imagine what that day might be like. Hopefully, I've lived a good enough, healthy lifestyle that I'll still be around for that eclipse.
Me too. Well, after this event, when you're in a room full of other astronomers and scientists, how do you think the conversations might go? What scientific facts might be discussed? What kind of research findings might be shared?
I have no idea because honestly, I think the conversations my friends and I, in fact, I know the conversations my friends and I are all going to have is going to be who had clouds, who didn't. And for those who didn't have clouds, we are just going to be looking at one another with that grin and that smile. And we are going to talk about, oh, wasn't that incredible? Where do I have to go to see another one? When's the next one? That is always the first question we always ask one another after seeing a total eclipse. When's the next one? So in this case, it's going to be August of 2026 in northern Spain, Reykjavik, Iceland, and eastern Greenland.
And you're going to be heading there?
Absolutely. I'm going to be leading an eclipse tour. I'm going to be on a ship in the fjords of Greenland if all goes as planned. But who knows? And that is, of course, the story for all eclipses. You can make your plans, and then it's up to nature to see what the weather beholds.
Yes, and didn't you do a tour, an eclipse tour in Antarctica in the last year or two?
Yes. So I work with a company that partners with the Planetary Society, Betchart Expeditions, and I lead eclipse tours for them. Back in 2019, we were at a school in a small town in the Andes where we had just an amazing time with the local population who didn't even know that they were going to be able to see the eclipse from their town. And then the pandemic happened, and that put a halt to everything. But in December of 2021, there was an eclipse visible from off the coast of Iceland, and it was just the time that they were we had vaccinations, they were opening up travel again, and so I was with a group of folks on a ship off of the coast of Iceland, or sorry, Antarctica. And I have never been more clouded out in my life than I was for that eclipse. You couldn't even see where the clouds began and the ocean was. But a few days later, I was standing on a beach with 250,000 penguins. And after another few days of that, I'd totally forgotten that I was there to see an eclipse. So it's one of the things that we tell folks about eclipse chasing. Go to the places that you want to go. And if the weather agrees and the eclipse is visible, then that's icing on the cake. But go to where you'd want to be. And in a sense, that's kind of what I've chosen for this eclipse. I'm here with my community in New York. And so if we're lucky with the weather, that's wonderful.
Tyler, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate your sharing all your information and insight. And I know you've been looking forward to this eclipse for a while, and best wishes for optimal viewing on April 8th.
Thank you. And clear skies to you too, and everybody else out there. Yeah, fingers crossed, and just get into totality. even if it's cloudy, even if it's raining, in totality, you will experience something unlike anything you've ever experienced before. So yeah, clear skies to all of us, and good luck. It's been a pleasure being here.
That's our show for this week. We hope you enjoyed it. And if you're planning to trek to the path of totality, we hope you have clear skies to enjoy the event. For The Traveler, this is Kurt Repenchek. See you in the parks.
The composers and musicians at Orange Tree Productions have created a unique collection known as the National Park Series that has grown to include more than 30 CD titles. Composed against the backdrop of a park's sounds of nature, these musical scores will connect you with these beautiful places and take you there, at least in your mind. This collection is the #1 selling National Park audio series in the world and provides the background music for National Parks Travelers podcasts. Visit them at orangetreeproductions.com. Editing and production work for the National Parks Traveler podcast is done by Splitbeard Productions. You can learn more about us at splitbeardproductions.com. National Parks Traveler is a 501c3 nonprofit media organization that provides daily editorial coverage of national parks and protected areas. Traveler's coverage is made possible by reader and listener donations. Visit us at nationalparkstraveler.org.